by the establishment, by Israel, whoever it is. They've been bought off. They can't be trusted. And so what am I watching? I'm watching the left engage in an action of identity politics, grievance politics, oppressor and oppressed dynamics. And now I'm watching a section of the right engage in the exact same thing. I understand the argument of saying, well, when you have legitimate power, you better use it to protect your institutions. I agree with that. Does that mean we give it up? We throw it out? Well, yeah, Nick, because look, it's not working right now. Does that mean it never worked?
We have Nick Freitas, the star of that great clip, joining us now. He's a former Green Beret, and you can find him at X at Nick Freitas, and he's the author of a book that I just love the cover of, The Man Book. So throw that up. I know that was a few months ago, but it's worth throwing up again because he's a point-by-point guide to sucking it up and getting the job done. I just love that title. Tells you how to kick down doors and so many other cool things that guys need to know. Nick, welcome back to the show. It's great to see you, my friend. And I wish we were under better circumstances, but you are reacting in that clip to what we could only call a mass demoralization campaign that we're seeing play out in social media and podcasts from the right. So tell us what you're seeing and why you decided to make that clip and start speaking out.
Well, I think the thing that really frustrated me is this whole idea that all is lost, that our elections mean nothing because that they're all rigged, that nothing has happened. The Trump administration has done absolutely nothing. I hear this all the time from members of the right because they're frustrated that it hasn't done enough. And so what I'm seeing over and over again is this, again, I don't want to call it an attempt. I don't know if it's just they're genuinely demoralized or they're actively trying to demoralize people, but it's this idea that there's nothing we can do about our situation except, I guess, complain and like, follow, and subscribe the various influencers that are pushing this particular narrative. And there's a very, very big difference between someone that says, I am frustrated because I voted for one thing and I don't feel like I'm getting it. There's a very big difference between that versus somebody that says nothing has happened. There's no difference between the parties. It's all one big uniparty. And I'm looking at that like that is verifiable garbage. It's absolute nonsense. It is totally accurate to say I don't think enough has been done. It is totally accurate to say that we have some people that claim to be Republicans and then govern very differently when we actually elect them. But to suggest that they're all the same, look, as someone that just had to leave Virginia, because I love Virginia, but as someone that had to leave it because it decided to lose its mind during the last election cycle, I can tell you right now, as frustrated as you might be with certain people on the right, and rightfully so, if you honestly believe that there's no difference, I encourage you to look at a state that was once governed by people that actually believed in things like individual liberty, private property rights, Second Amendment rights, pro-life, versus now when it's actually run by people that want abortion all the way up to the point of birth and want pornography within your public school library and believe that your guns should be confiscated from you or severely restricted. Because there is a significant difference between living in one of those two places.
Blake?
Yeah, no, I love that. I get frustrated as well. There's so many cases where, and I often use the term I use for it is like emotional incontinence. I think what drives a lot of it is I've mentioned this, it's a little addictive to be really emotionally built up, really angry, really sad. That's why people like watching horror movies or really sad movies, because they get a rush out of those emotions. And I think we're seeing that play out on social media over and over again, that it's really satisfying to say, they've completely ruined it. 2024 was for nothing. It's all a waste. And it's a lot more, when you have nuance, it's a lot less satisfying to come out and say, there's ways the administration has fallen short. There's other ways the administration is doing great. Here's what they can do to make things go better. Here's what they can do to turn the polls around. And we really have a moral responsibility, I think. Charlie was very aware of this. That's what was going on when he would say no blackpilling. It doesn't mean never complain, never criticize. It's that anytime you're complaining and criticizing, it needs to be aiming to help somebody, give them an action item, direct someone in the right direction. Here's how we fix it. Here's how lawmakers can fix it. And I think it's a discussion that needs to be had, because I think there's a lot of runaway dooming, a lot of runaway complaining on the right, and it could cause the left to take over the country again.
Yeah. Well, I think at this point,
I just want to say, too, that it's very difficult to build something. It's very difficult to build something. Very difficult to build the coalition that won in 2024. It is very easy to be a doomer. It's very easy to be a black pillar. It's very easy to tear down and destroy. And Nick, I heard you trying to chime in here, but I just want to say that it is so easy, and it's morally lazy, it's morally repugnant to be a doomer. Go ahead, Nick.
Well, no, I was basically going to say something very similar. I remember watching people when I was in the legislature in Virginia, and I was one vote out of 100 in the Virginia General Assembly, and one vote in the 100 of the Virginia House of Delegates. And I would carry a bill, and I would lobby for the bill, and I would argue for the bill in subcommittee, and I would go out on social media and tell everyone what exactly was happening with the bill. And then the bill, when it passed, and I'd be told, I'm sick of excuses, Nick. I'm like, dude, I'm one vote out of 100 in the Virginia House of Delegates, and the Democrats control the building right now. What more would you like me to do? And it was amazing because a lot of the times those criticisms would come from one of two people. It was either people that were just fed up, but then once you explained what you were doing, why you were trying to do it, and how they could help, they got to work. I love those people. I love those people because they're not obsessed with politics, but they expect something substantive to get done. And if you can actually direct them on how they can help in a practical and meaningful way, they do it. They do it. Then there's another group. And this is the group that gets this intense moral satisfaction out of risking nothing, putting in zero work other than complaining about everybody else. And in the moment, they never want to run for office themselves. They never want to put in any actual work because who cares? And, well, they would never get elected because they're too honest. I look at those people, I say, gosh, I sure wish you were in charge. You apparently have all of the answers, and if only we could get you into a position of real authority, you'd achieve everything. But they don't want that position because deep down they know they wouldn't be able to accomplish anything, and they don't want to be held accountable. This is Teddy Roosevelt's The Critic versus the Man in the Arena. And so I've always been very big. It's one of the things, again, I've always appreciated about Charlie. It was like, if you're upset about something, I have a way that you can actually be more effective. And the people that actually take up that call and do it, those are the ones that I respect. Those are the ones whose critiques, whose arguments, whose frustrations I have no problem listening to because I know they're going to put in the work to actually do something about it. But then you've got this whole other group where they honestly believe that, well, I showed up and voted. Oh, well, I guess that's the totality of your civic duty. I guess nothing else is required to protect our civilization, our way of life, our system, except for you to show up and vote, right? That's it? The people that voted to separate from England in the first place, that was all they should have had to do, right? Like, hey, King George, we're out. And no other requirements, right? No other duties or obligations on your point. On your part, you're just there for moral support. I'm sorry, I got nothing for that. And the more they talk and the more they gather influence online, the conclusion I come to is this serves no one except the left. Because the Mamdani wing of the Democratic Party that is taking over right now, if they can't get your vote, they will settle for your apathy all the way up until the point where they have enough power, and then it doesn't matter anymore. So, again, I will listen to critiques from anybody in the trenches.
Yeah, if they can't get your vote, they will settle for your apathy. Man, that is so good. Nick, stay right there. So this whole thing made me remember Yuri Bezmenov, who was a KGB defector from the Soviet Union, and he warned against these demoralization campaigns. And it feels like we're living through this mass psychosis where everybody's just like dooming and that gets the clicks, and if you're not super cynical, nobody believes you because you got to be a paid op or a shill or something like that. Nobody ever seems to give any credence to the idea that we just love our country, and I have kids and you have kids and Blake's gonna have a lot of kids, and we just want a country to pass down to the next generation that looks better than the one we got. Okay, nobody thinks about that. Okay, but let's hear him in his own words, and I'll have you react on the other side. SOT 24.
They're programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded and common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society.
There's so much in that clip, Nick, because I think about the work Charlie was doing raising up that generation of patriotic Americans and how much work was done in that direction. And it feels like we've taken a couple steps back.
Yeah.
But what he says about the fact that you could tell them black is black and white is white, they still won't acknowledge the truth. So when we talk about, hey, we've gotten rid of 1.4 million people, illegals out of this country, which is a fact that I tweeted about over the weekend. A lot of people came in the comments and said, so what, that's nothing. Well, guess what? The alternative is 3 to 5 million illegals every year under the Democrats. So don't tell me it's nothing. But the floor is yours, Nick. Your reaction to this demoralization campaign.
Well, Yuri Bezmenov was talking about something called active measures that was put out by the Soviet Union. It was again a very active, well-funded attempt in order to influence through our university system, through our culturally shaping institutions. And one of the things they talked about was the ability of these things to basically outlive themselves. So essentially, the Soviet Union is no more. Does that mean that the programs that they implemented are no longer successful? No, I would argue that they've been wildly successful with a number of generations of Americans that have been taught to believe that, you know, the United States or the West in general is evil, it's bad, it's fundamentally flawed, and it has to be overthrown. And that's where you get everything from wokeism to third worldism to decolonization to, you know, all the little hot words that are used by people that all have essentially the same moral and philosophical foundation. But what you see going on the right is different right now. The right is looking at this. I was actually speaking at the ARC conference in London. And I said, one of the things that we have to do on the right is be careful about something. And that is if all we're telling young men is you have to fight hard to protect Western civilization so GDP numbers go up, that's not sufficient. Right? It's right now you are looking at young men in the West who have been told repeatedly for the last 2 to 3 decades that they're the source of all the world's ills, that they're the problem, that they're evil, they're fascist, they're racist, they're sexist, they're bigoted, whatever. And they're looking at their own conduct and saying, I don't buy this. I wasn't these things, but you're telling me to defend Western civilization. What do you mean by that? Should I defend the thing that has been doing this to me for the past 3 decades, or should I defend the thing that was powerless to stop it? And that's a good point. But if you end the conversation there, then all you're going to get is demoralization. And there's some people that have built a huge audience by telling young men especially, it's not worth it. It all sucks. It all needs to be burned down. And you have to ask the question, what are they after? How do they possibly believe that this is going to yield better results further along down the line? And what I want to do is I want to remind young men that, no, the thing that we're asking them to defend is not just Western civilization. I'm asking people to defend Christendom. And that's not because Christendom has always had the best fighters. It's not because our way of life in the United States has always been represented by the best people. That's never the case. That is the nature, that is human nature. The real question they have to ask yourself is what you believe true? And I believe that Christianity is true. I believe that this country, that our way of life was fundamentally built upon Christian ethics and theology. I believe that we then used centuries of wisdom with respect to trying to avoid the concentration of power in the hands of a few. And that our founders set up an incredible system of government that has, in many respects, stood the test of time beautifully. And I am not about to look at our system. I'm not about to look at our faith. I'm not about to look at the incredible history that the United States has and throw it all out because currently it has some really bad stewards, or that it has had some really bad stewards in the immediate past. I want to find the people that want to once again reference not just the Constitution, but the ideas that informed it, and said, I'm willing to fight for those. I'm willing to fight for those. I'm willing to give up everything for those, just like the people that went before me. And that's what I want young men, that's what I want young people in the United States to understand, is that nothing is easier than to throw in the towel and say it all sucks. But unless you're really willing to accept that we're in the worst and most direst period of all of American history, and so therefore your effort is no longer necessary or warranted, if you're really willing to say that, well then what do you say? What do you say to the people that actually went across the Delaware with George Washington on the verge of the Continental Army collapsing? What do you say to the 19-year-olds that stormed beaches at Normandy? What do you say to every other American that had to face incredible to existential crises within American history and rose up and conquered it and created something better? You're just not worthy of that legacy? I don't believe that's true. But I also believe that one of the keys here is that, and this is something that, this is the reason why Charlie's legacy endures. Because there's been a lot of people that were able to talk about politics effectively. The reason why Charlie's legacy endures is because he didn't just point to an election cycle. He pointed to God and he pointed to family. You give men God and family, they'll fight for the civilization in order to protect it.
All right, without further ado, we have the great Helen Andrews, who's the author of Boomers, The Men and Women Who Promised Freedom and Delivered Disaster. We had her on for one of my favorite articles of all time about the wokeism is just feminism that is institutionalized with our businesses. Great conversation. And now she's got a new one from Compact Magazine, The Racial Crossroads. Helen Andrews, Blake was the one who showed me this article. Helen, it is amazing and it's so important. So welcome back to the show. I can't wait to have this discussion with you. Blake, do you want to take it away?
Let's just dive right into it. You describe America, as the title says, we're at a racial crossroads. A great decision has to be made. Helen, why don't you just tell our listeners, what is the decision America has to make in your view?
A lot of people are walking around feeling like the insanity we all lived through in 2020 is thankfully behind us, and we don't have to worry about wokeness anymore. I am here to tell you, unfortunately, that that's not true, because the factors that led to the episode of racial hysteria that we lived through in 2020 it wasn't just a random episode that was caused by George Floyd. These are deep problems related to decades-long demographic trends. To put it in a single sentence, the racial regime that we crafted in the 1960s for an America that was 90% white and 10% black, roughly, is no longer going to function effectively in the America that's coming down the pike and that Generation Z is already living in, when it's less than 50% white and the people who are able to claim special treatment under our system of racial laws are actually a demographic majority. That is just a recipe for race intruding into every interaction, every institution, every political issue. And that's an extremely toxic outcome that we are now at a decision point when we're kind of almost at the last moment when we can avert that bad outcome.
You say the Trump administration's done good stuff. They've actually been trying to apply civil rights laws fairly and say, it says you can't discriminate based on race. You guys have been discriminating against white people. That's not allowed. But you make the case that this is inherently doomed as long as we're locked in seeing race with every single thing that we do. And I love the idiom you use to describe this. You describe what it was like living in Soviet Russia and what it meant to live in a Marxist system. Can you build out that comparison? The Marxist system that the Soviet Union had versus our race system that we live under.
If you've been on the internet, you may have seen people refer to the modern left's ideology as race communism. I liked that phrase when I first came across it because I thought it was funny. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's not actually a joke. The HR person enforces our particular rules of political correctness. Any place you work, if you work at an institution that employs more than 10 people, you've probably got an ideological enforcer on your staff. So this idea that our government has an ideology in it, it's not enough for people to sort of accept the government that they live under as legitimate. They have to accept the ideology. The government is sort of evangelical about its ideological line. That's a recipe for, it's going to feel oppressive. It is contrary to the basic principles that America used to be founded on, which is freedom of thought and freedom of philosophy. It's not a recipe for solid, independent, Republican citizenship if your government has an ideology that it feels it necessary to enforce on you.
I think that's a really good point. Charlie would call the HR departments and the DEI directors the commissars of wokeness, enforcing the party line. And we have made progress. We've been pushing back, but as we always say, woke is not dead. I know that woke was one of the terms that you bandied about in this piece, kind of wondering, should that be the word or the phrase that we use to describe this turning point that we're at? But you say this is one of the last points that we have to fix this problem. What do you mean by that, and what would the solutions be?
I love the work that the Trump administration is doing on this front right now. They are stacking up new wins every day on stuff like this. Harmeet Dillon at the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice suing these schools that have been discriminating against white and Asian college applicants, med school applicants. I think that's really great. I love that they're suing businesses for their anti-white DEI programs, telling them you can't racially humiliate your employees as part of, a workplace seminar. That's against the law. I love what they're doing. But I don't think it's a sustainable long-term solution, because if we get into a situation where we conduct all of our politics by race-based lawsuits, then the party of race, which is the Democrats, is better than us at that. The law is tilted in their favor. I think that's a battle we're going to lose. So I think when we stack up these wins like the Trump administration is doing, we need to think about what's our long-term strategy. What's the end goal we really want to arrive at? And my 2 cents is that the only solution to this toxic cycle of race-based conflict that we're kind of just seeing the start of in America, the only way to avert that is to go back to freedom of association and just enough with the race-based lawsuits, period. That's just not the way we should conduct our politics. But right now, returning to freedom of association is kind of a political non-starter. So the only way to get liberal institutions to sort of entertain even that possibility would be to inflict enough pain on them now through the kinds of lawsuits that the Trump administration is targeting at places like Harvard. If Harvard feels like it's inundated with lawsuits, and the only way to stop it is to go back to freedom of association and just take race-based lawsuits off the table completely, I want to get Harvard to a point where Harvard would agree to that. And I think the way to get Harvard to that point is to use these lawsuits based on equality under the law to inflict enough pain on them now.
Helen Andrews, The Racial Crossroads at compactmag.com. Please check it out. She is wonderful. Helen, can we just put you in a lab and multiply you by a couple million? That would be great. You are fantastic.
I have 3 kids. I'm doing my
Blake's
best.
always very good. We got to get above replacement levels here. We'll see you guys tomorrow. Until then.